Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Friday afternoon. It's not Friday night. I don't, unless you're like in the middle of the ocean or something like that. And you
Right.
have, of course, the same three clowns that brought you the joy of playing the last time. We have up in the upper left-hand corner, we have Mr. David DC Carl.
Hello, everyone.
There you go. And of course, we have from the greater St. Louis area, Jeff Easterwood, Jay Beatnick. What's it shaking?
Right.
The the,
Oh,
the
muscles.
Of course,
Nice.
I failed to mention DC of Clockwork Phoenix Games,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
your turn next. We want to make sure we pimp our respective internets properly on this show, and of course, Jeff Easterwood, the handsomer side of your turn. Go.
Yes. The handsomest.
That's right. And then of course your comely host MenothJohn of the Painting with MenothJohn Entertainment Network. So ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to talk a little bit more, kind of pick up on the conversation from where we started last time. And this time we're going to shift the discussion a little bit to the welcoming aspect of gaming. And David, the idea behind this podcast and the idea behind this particular episode was yours. And so I'd like to kick it over to you to kind of give our listeners sort of a broad idea of 30,000 foot level. What are we talking about by the welcomingness?
Well, the idea for the whole series came from when the Bob Ross, The Joy of Painting episodes were all streamed not too long ago. And I got to thinking about it as I had that on in the background while I was doing typing or painting or various things that I was doing. I would just let that play in the background and listen to the nice the nice tones of Bob Ross and that very welcoming personality. And there at the start of every episode, and for a while it was at the start of every episode of the Painting with MenothJohn show there with the old intro where it said, "We'd like to welcome you." And that really was one of the pieces of this whole joy of playing concept that I had, where we need to have some of that same attitude, some of that same warmth, some of that same welcoming nature, so that people will be want to be part of our gaming groups, so that we'll experience the joy of playing and not just kind of the chore of playing. Like, you don't want it to become something that is just a habit. You want it to stay fun and exciting. And that's what the joy of playing is all about. And that's what this episode, "We'd like to welcome you," is about.
I've become far less welcoming as the episodes have gone on with Painting with MenothJohn, and it's mostly Easterwood's fault because of the new intro. Because we needed. I had decided that copyright infringement was not something I could continue to stand for. So, but I completely agree. And I've had a very similar experience when it comes to welcoming, in that when I first started doing miniatures gaming, I was living in Utah. And so I kind of came into that meta, but then I had to move, and I moved back here to Wisconsin. So I was coming into an entirely different meta. Some people I knew, most people I didn't. And so it was an opportunity for me to see some good aspects of how to come into a
Yeah.
meta, and maybe some challenging things that we can kind of help give some tips today. What Jeff? What's your perspective on that?
So St. Louis has a giant War Machine meta. It goes back all the way to the start of the game, and I really think that it's having people that have passion, because passion's infectious. And we have like our press gangers. They love the game. They're always at the game store. They're always playing new and exciting things. And they're when they give demos, you can definitely tell that they love the game, and it exudes out of them, and it gets translated through that demo.
It's
And I
all
really think that having those kind of people really helps bring that excitement to a game every week.
it's that passion, and trying to kind of show that passion to the newer player and make them feel welcome. And so, I mean, one of the things we kind of talked a little bit about during the abbreviated pre-ramble that we just basically had on Skype rather than actually record it, was that how do you go about replicating this kind of welcoming feeling that you talked about, DC, from the Bob Ross thing? And we're seeing that right now at my current LGS, Realm of the Dragon, up there in the Milwaukee area. There's a newer
Cool,
guy
Dave.
that moved into the Milwaukee area from Michigan, new to War Machine, and I have to tell you that Matt Wonke, who's the PG up there, is doing just a great job, making sure that he's getting good games with new people. Last night I played against him, and he's a Protectorate player, and so it was an opportunity for me to kind of I've played Protectorate for many years. To kind of help give him some tips and tricks, and I think that's one way that you can make a person feel more welcome. Is if you've been playing a similar faction, no matter what the game, help them by having a game with that person. Play something that's a little wacky and crazy, and maybe try to help them understand their list a little bit better.
Right.
And so, I mean, David, what have you seen more recently in your area out there in the Pacific Northwest, there in the greater Seattle area?
Well, one of the things that I think applies here definitely, but applies in other spots as well when there's more than one game store, is that you wind up with slightly different experiences at those different stores, a different personality almost of the group that's there. There's some stores around here that are known very much for being very tournament oriented, and you can find casual games and get that more hardcore casual sort of experience if that's what you're shooting for. But it's a lot easier at those stores to find tournaments, to find people preparing for the next big event or preparing for the next huge convention event or even Iron Gauntlet finals or something. There's certain stores that are more focused that direction.
Sure.
And then other stores that their focus is more casual. And I think it's important to let the newer players know kind of what the lay of the land is if you have a bunch of different stores in your area or even different events, so that they can have a realistic picture of what goes on where in the area and what types of things they would be most interested. Maybe they are most interested in quickly kind of spooling up to a tournament style gaming. Maybe they're more interested in an ongoing league that's the official league system, or maybe they're interested in more of a silly, crazy, wacky league with nonsense scenarios. That's not the right word, but like just the really off the wall stuff.
Yeah.
And knowing where to go for what is very important for those new players. And it's, of course, very critical to be passionate. I think we've got a lot of great passionate folks, but people are passionate in different ways and in different directions. So letting new players know what direction they need to go in to find what they're looking for can also help a lot.
Jeff, what's your perspective on that? What have you seen as far as, do you see this a similar kind of a thing? And I know exactly what David's talking about with in the Seattle area, because working for Starbucks, I get a chance to visit, and Mox's boarding house is one of those stores where there's a lot of competitive players. Games and I believe games in Gizmos tends to be a little bit more casual. And so is that a fair characterization, DC?
I think so. I think Mox Boarding House too is has a big enough play area that on certain nights you can find a little bit of everything. But yeah, they do have a lot of their big tournament players go to that particular store. But there's also stores like over in like the West Seattle area and stuff that are a lot of not the same type of gamers. It's a lot more like dads and stuff who have a little bit of time off and go to the game store when they get an hour or two and just want to play a quick casual game that maybe they only play once every month or so, rather than these guys who are in there several times a week hammering on their lists and perfecting everything. Maybe it's just people who they've picked up an army, they don't play as much, and they just want to have a little bit of fun.
Man, I need to find that store. Anyway,
yeah,
we could talk about that.
And another aspect of it is rules knowledge.
Yeah,
I mean, we all want to play by the same rules. That's important. But do you assume that your opponent knows all of the rules, or do you kind of talk things out?
Yep.
Do you use a clock in your casual games or your non-tournament games, your just Wednesday night gaming? Because that's a very big difference, and certainly not as welcoming as let's just relax and have fun.
Absolutely. Jeff, what are now in St. Louis, do you see a similar breakdown between kind of the I don't want to say attitude, but I would say maybe the style of play as being sort of
Yeah.
developing like a mini meta at the different stores?
Yeah, so what we have is on Wednesday night is our regular War Machine night. And what you'll see there is you'll see the tournament players that are preparing for tournaments kind of pair off with each other, and then the casual players take over all of the rest of the store.
Got it.
So it's and usually we have a ton of players, so there's just a spectrum. And mostly the tournament level players, a lot of them, what they'll do is we have a Facebook group, the St. Louis Syndicate, and they'll just post to say, hey, I have a Sunday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. I have this day. I want to play somebody. And then someone else will post, hey, I got some time that day. And they'll just make games. And there's enough players that you can just post, like, I want to play X faction or X caster. And you can find somebody and set up a time that week to play those people.
Yeah.
But what I found is that Wednesday is so crowded that if you're not, there's about 2 or 3 waves of games that happen. Like there's the 8 early guys at like 4 to 6, and then like the after work guys are like 6 to like 8 or something. And then if you get there past 8 or 9, it's better just go to Applebee's because there's 30 people here all crawling all over the place trying to play games.
Sure.
And usually, like you go there, you're like, oh, no games for me. or they have game night has some rental rooms. You can go rent rooms, and usually they're rented out because some of the tournament players are just like, I want to make sure I have space for my game, and they go and rent the back rooms, and they'll play some tournament stuff.
Interesting.
But definitely, there's a lot of new gamers, a lot of casual gamers, and they'll just play scenarios. They'll play low point games, high point games, and then the tournament players. There's a really in-depth discussion about the local and national metas and how things are doing, how things are moving due to erratas or different models coming out or different lists that people are starting to play or not play.
Sure.
And so that's an always changing meta. And we just had a tournament last weekend on Saturday. I ran my first tournament last weekend, and it was 20 people. Like, we'd pack the house, and I was like worried. I was like, "Oh, this is crazy." So we pull from Columbia and down in the Boot Hill with the Sutherlands, and we have we had like 6 guys from Heroic Adventures across the river.
Mm-hmm.
So and all of that is different because all of those different stores have completely different levels of play and levels of casual to tournament, and and it's real interesting to talk to them and to find out all about all those guys. And we just like St. Louis itself is kind of a good pass through for a lot of metas, and there's a lot of melting pot of a lot of other stuff. But yeah, there's a really good striation of it, and you see a lot of it, and you can when you talk to different people from different game stores and different places around, you can see subtle differences, but generally there's enough players that you can find a game that you need to, which is really nice.
Sure. And, the thing that, as we're talking about, not to continue to belabor this particular part of the topic, but it was pretty interesting in the early days of the Intermountain Cup to see the difference in the stores, because you'd have Gameopolis, which is Jay Larson's store. And I'm going to tell you what, the Intermountain area had not seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
And they would come down to Utah and basically take our lunch money and then leave. And it's like, well, how about that? And then Seattle got involved. And all of a sudden, Seattle showed up at the Intermountain Cup and took Gameopolis's lunch money. And then it became like this like power war, and those of us who were in Logan, Utah, were going like, well, this has sort of left us behind. So, but one of the things we wanted to talk about here as we were kind of talking about the agenda and stuff like that is, I would, we all play different games, and we don't want to turn this into strictly a War Machine and Hordes topic, but there are some games that are probably better as entries into miniature wargaming, and there are some games that are maybe a little bit more challenging to bring in. And what are some of the points that make those games difficult? And I think, we'll start with, obviously the one that many of us have the most experience with, and that's War Machine Hordes from Privateer Press. And I would say that one of the things that makes it very challenging to bring a new player into this game is probably twofold. One, the portfolio of models for a game that is as mature as Privateer Press's War Machine Hordes is daunting.
Yeah.
There's everything from Sunburst Deliverer crews to the Hand of Judgment. And you look at and that's in strictly one faction. There are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of models that are now in the product line. And as a new player, that can be very intimidating. In your guys' experience, I'll start with David. As you've looked at new people who are coming into the hobby, how do you kind of cut through that fog for them?
I think that one of the things that we see a lot of I would think it's fair to say most miniatures games have some sort of a starter box or whatever they want to call it, some sort of intro product.
Yep.
And having two of those go head to head, hopefully, is a experience that teaches you a lot about the game, and that's a lot of fun, and that really gives you a feel for what that particular game is going to be like.
Indeed.
We've got starter boxes for War Machine and Hordes, for Guild Ball, for Relic Knights, for Drop Zone Commander, for on and on and on. You've got these starter products, and if they give you a good introduction to the game that you enjoy, then that's what is really going to get someone hooked. That's kind of your initial getting the person on the line and then reel them in.
Indeed. And, I think that as you go back to, Games Workshop, God bless them and God curse them at the same time, with their introductory box sets for 40K, that's something that you have two factions that are in there that you can assemble and you can have some semblance of a game with. Privateer did it with the Hordes starter sets, the two-player starter sets, and the War Machine two-player starter sets, because, got to have somebody buy some incinerators. Right. And and then you look at other games that they're following that trend, and that is a great way to to your buddy and say, this is something that let's get into this, and it's a reasonable investment from a dollar standpoint, and you can get there.
And I like that you brought up the two-player starter boxes for War Machine and Hordes, because even just having that one unit on each side of the table added in gives, I think, a better picture of what a typical game of War Machine or Hordes is like. I remember folks who started with the battle box sets with just a caster and jacks, for example, and this was really prevalent in Mark 1. And they'd learn the game and they'd be like, oh, this is so cool. You allocate all this focus, you use it to boost, you can do power attacks. That's what the game is all about. And then they go to their first open game night in War Machine. And at the time, you didn't see a lot of jacks. There were plenty of army lists that had 0 war jacks in them.
Right.
So people were like, well, wait, this isn't the game that I wanted to get involved with or that you showed me. This is a different game.
Right.
And we don't really see that in Mark II. Certainly not nearly as much. There's a lot more warjacks on the table, which is great. It's a truer experience to say you can play a warcaster and all their jacks. But I do like that the two-player starter boxes have a unit in there, have something to show, hey, this isn't just a battle group sort of game. You've got your battle group, and then you've also got your other components of your army that support them and protect them.
Jeff, you were just commenting in the chat room to Barbard about the all-in-one boxes.
Oh yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wish they had not been the limited run that they were, but I guess I think that what made them amazing was that it really did give you. In each one of those boxes, they were very well thought out as far as the list that it actually represented. and it gave you a real flavor of the play style of the faction. And there is, with the battle boxes, which were a much lower investment price point, which is great. As you said, DC, it can lead to a little bit of confusion for a newer player as far as what this game is really all about. And it is War Machine, it is Hordes. Beasts and Jacks are important, but sometimes it's, you have to understand how units work. And I think that was one of the things that the all-in-one box really brought to the party.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there and agree in some regards, but I think that the concern that I have with the all-in-one boxes is also the concern that wound up proving true in how they were sold and how they were purchased and stuff, is that they're not really starter. They're a starter product, but they're not really a new player product. Far more existing players got into new factions with the all-in-one boxes than new players got into it, because that is still a steeper slope than you want for a new player. Like, think back to various video games and stuff.
Yep.
They have gotten really good at kind of stepping you into what you need to know.
Yep.
The first mission gives you this information, then you learn this information, then you learn this information. Sometimes it's extremely step by step. It's like, okay, well, here are the keys. Here are the way you go left and right. Here's how you jump. And they kind of introduce it to you a bite-sized piece at a time. And the all-in-one box is a pretty big bite.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So we have a game design person on this particular show right at this moment. How would if the other than the wrestling game, Jeff, which I'm still waiting for, goddammit. And when you kickstart it, I will buy it. Anyway, let's just kind of take how would you change that? Is that something that you can comment on, DC? If you'd prefer not to, I understand. How would you fix that problem of providing that introductory tutorial feel, but perhaps giving a slightly more realistic viewpoint of how a particular faction plays?
Yeah, and I think obviously it's going to depend a lot on the game.
Sure.
War Machine is the toughest example I can think of. I think all three of it. Have you, Jeff, played a little bit of Guild Ball?
Yeah, a little bit. I had a couple of demos with Butchers rule.
So
go Brewers, go Engineers.
You see kind of how it plays. That one, I feel like, is pretty easy, because if you have you go from the starter box to a normal size game, you're getting the experience right off the bat.
You are playing the exact same game.
You're playing the same game. You might add a few more dudes, but it's the same game. There's not some big revelatory step in between where you start and where you wind up.
Yep.
And I think other games we could talk about are very similar in that regard. But War Machine has a lot of kind of big things to consider. The Warcaster and Warlock mechanics, there's a lot of meat on that from a rules standpoint.
Yep.
And then the way things interact, which isn't even necessarily part of the rules, but just something that you start to see as you play, how all these different pieces come together. It's very much a coordinated machine. So you've got your Warjacks, your Warcaster, possibly an opposing Warlock and War Beasts, and units, and solos, and maybe cavalry, and maybe battle engines, and maybe colossals or gargantuans. You've got a lot of different parts with a lot of rules meat on those bones.
Yep.
So I think you really have to make a choice and say, what are the most important things to teach here?
Yep.
I think one way to do it might be a starter box that is a Warcaster, a Warjack, a fairly small unit, and a solo. Preferably with some interactions there, preferably with some ranged attacks and some melee attacks in there, enough to show some upkeep spells, enough to show a lot of the basics without overwhelming people.
You know, you make a really interesting point, DC, and I don't want to step over the top of you there, Jeff, but it's like the skills that the battle box in War Machine Hordes is teaching is Warcaster management and Warjack, what you can do with focus stuff. In other words, power attacks, charging, things like that. And for right or for wrong, or for good or for bad, the skills that are very critical to being successful at War Machine more in one man's opinion, more reside in Warcaster management and then positioning and unit. I think what you proposed is really excellent. I'm not doing a very good job of articulating it, but having the person learn about unit cohesion and how do units activate and that kind of stuff is a different set of rules interactions that perhaps one would encounter more frequently.
Yeah, and I think that another way to do it is to go back to our video game analogy where it's like, okay, here's this thing that's teaching you this. Now this next mission is teaching you something new. Another possibility for a War Machine and Hordes complexity level of game is to have that starter box, but then to have the next step product-wise be something like, here's kind of this unit pack.
Like, an expansion pack.
What's that?
An expansion pack.
Yeah. Like here's a unit or two, a support solo or two, things that fit really well together. I mean, we could even probably come up with what we think some of the right choices would be there for different factions. So if you were doing Protectorate, you'd probably put in there Acquire. Yep. And you'd put in some self-sufficient unit or another, and then maybe a solo. And you add those things to the game, so you're playing pretty close to War Machine at that point.
So what we're talking about here is taking the battle box, taking that all-in-one box and splitting it into two products. And it does some amazing stuff because you split it into two products, you do not have all of the established players rolling up on a new faction. You literally have two beginner products that are specifically targeting new players. And you get to 35 points with the two. But don't heavily discount the fact that you put them together. No, I'm not giving devil horns here. We're not going to a satanic podcast. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
So my thoughts on it are that what I like to do is with new players, I like to just like you'll give demos and things, but then let them just play low point games. Like play a lot of low point games. 15 point, 20 point. I love 20 point, like Highlander. 20 point Highlander is amazing because you bring like one of each, and it's just a little bit of everything. And you run around, and the first thing I tell them is say, generally just find things you like to play. Like find, things you like the look of, find things you kind of like how they do things, and just play a lot of them. Like, play at whatever points you want to. And say you don't play 20 points. You like a guy's like, I want to play tons of jacks. So like, all right, let's play 50 points, nothing but jacks. Like mangled metal, let's do that. Yeah, because you let them set the tone of the game, and then you can just pull anything out of your bag. Yep. And then that helps. It helps them kind of learn. Like they're like, I want to learn how to do jacks. I want to learn how to play this super jack caster that runs 6 jacks. And I'm like, cool. I'll figure something out there. So, but I love just letting people set any parameters on the game because I have enough models I can play that game, and it's fun for me to play different things than the I'm going to play my 50 point really strict list that I've all put together. Right. But for new players, letting them just have at it, just have whatever fun with the game. Because when I was new, I just play whatever I wanted. I'm like, I like the look of these sword knights. I'm going to play those guys. I like this shooty dude. I'm that dude. I want to play this thing. And I just threw things I liked together, and I lost a ton. But I loved to play because I was writing this narrative of these cool guys that like, oh, these sword knights are running over here, and they're going to attack this guy and get obliterated because they're like attacking a jack, and I don't have. I'm not flanking. I'm not doing. I'm just playing horribly. But the fun part of putting that army together and painting it and naming all my guys and everything, it was really neat, and it's a lot of fun for new players.
So, I mean, one of the things that we kind of started talking a little bit about is that there are some games that do it better and some games that are more challenging to be welcoming with. And I think, DC, I think you hit the nail right on the head, is that with a game like Guild Ball, you have Steamforged has thought of the new player first and foremost and has really geared the game almost towards bringing new people in. However, even they are making some missteps. One of the things that's really important to being a welcoming style game is a stable rule set. And one of the things that I think I think they've done a lot of things right but I think that they have gone through, I think they're on their 4th or 5th errata right now, and the cards have already within 1 year needed a full reprint, and that's a scary thing for a new player.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things to talk about there. One is more general for everybody these days. I think it's good to have your core rules available for free.
Yep.
The War Machine Hordes rules are currently available online for free. The Guild Ball rules have been available online all along.
Jesus, their whole game is for free if you really don't mind playing with something that's not a miniature.
Right. Just have some cut out pieces of paper that's the right size. You could theoretically play it for free.
Yeah. My Butcher's faction is 100% wood pulp.
Okay. So, like, that's an element that can be very welcoming. Are your core rules available for free? Are your faction rules available for free? And some companies are doing that. Some companies aren't. One of the things that I think people definitely want out of a game is they want the meta to be live. They want it to be vibrant.
Yes.
And we look at all of these computer games these days. You've got all sorts of online experiences where the rule set is as live as they want it to be. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they do more than one errata update in our terms, more than one per month.
Yes.
Where it's like, all right, we're going to rebalance all of these models in our video game. Well, a few weeks later, now we're going to tweak all of these things. And it's kind of, from a game developer standpoint, that's living the dream right there. Like, if you can tweak one little cost here, one little ability there.
That's a beautiful thing.
It's a lot more arduous for a miniatures game. War Machine and Hordes, we've had, 13 errata updates in Mark II?
Yeah, probably. I think we're clipping along at pretty much a pace of twice a year. We're getting
roughly
an errata.
2 a year.
And to be honest, for the most part, those until recently have been pretty cosmetic.
Yep.
But what we're seeing, and obviously you can't talk about it, but it looks as though they're heading towards an errata schedule that leads to make sure that 2.5 never has to happen. It's just going to kind of happen as it goes along, and then maybe sometime they release a card pack. And
it's interesting that you say 2.5, because I think that's where Guild Ball is right now. At 1.5.
1.5. They're at a remix.
Yeah.
Right.
So they started things out. It was on Kickstarter in 2014. And people were already starting to play it, starting to find little rules that could be clearer.
Yep.
They've had a few errata documents, but the type of errata there is very comparable to other miniatures games. It's like, okay, well, people were confused on how and when exactly this thick-skinned ability triggers.
Right.
So every single model with thick-skinned, we've now got to put into the errata document. And I know how that goes from experience.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's like, oh, we want to errata shield wall. Screw you.
No, we're not going to. and it's one of those rules
it's
that
necessary, but I think that and I think it's important to the players, but we got to realize that a lot of that isn't really big changes or confusing changes. Most people probably could have used their old cards and understood thick skinned just fine, or whatever it's called. It's something like that.
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But when they changed it on a whole bunch of different dudes, they had to issue errata for all of them. And so it's good to be able to do that because it keeps everybody on the same page. It keeps things clear. It's good to be able to make those minor balance adjustments because it keeps the game more vibrant.
Yeah.
It's good to have those rules available for free. But the downside, like you mentioned, is that some people might be playing with the wrong rules.
Right.
And that is unfortunate.
Now, I mean, one of the ways that we can kind of talk about miniatures games that where rules are more static than what they are in maybe some of the more traditional miniatures games like Malifaux or Infinity or War Machine Hordes is there's a whole nother level from a welcoming standpoint that's worth discussing, and that is the hybrid game, which is between that miniatures game that sits between full miniatures and a board game. And I'm thinking of games like Arcadia Quest and Crossmaster and Rivet Wars and games like that. How does one, in your experience, and Jeff, I'm going to start with you on this one, how does one bring people into miniatures hobby using that type of a vehicle?
So what I've seen is that you have board gamers, you have miniature gamers at the game store, and usually they don't really cross.
Mm-hmm.
But then the hybrid game, like say like Imperial Assault, is good for this.
That's a hybrid.
You find a game that is in their fandom, and then you play that game with them, and then you develop those friendships, and they also see you play other games. And a lot of how you get people into games is in having those mutual friendships, and then in bringing them in and saying, while you're at the game store, you're just talking, like they come and they'll always, people always come look at your game at the game table, and developing those friendships just draws people in through a community aspect rather than just like a gameplay aspect.
Exactly.
But in the same way, it's just really a lot of it is just looking at your models. Like in Privateer, like I love minions. Minions are super characterful models.
Mm-hmm.
Like Barnabas has a big axe, and the Gators they have big mouths, and there's some funny model, like the Pharaoh have funny models and like mean models. Like Carver looks amazing. It's my favorite model in the whole game. He's got his giant sword. He's a regal. He's like, I am Lord Carver.
Best name in the whole game too, without question.
Yeah.
Best name.
And so you just having all your models painted, having them painted really well, and sitting on the table all colored together, and they're all hanging out, and having them watch you have a lot of fun with the game really helps bring people in, even random people at the game store or your friends you've been playing board games with, and having a diverse set of gaming skills. Like I do some LARPing, I do some like boffer fighting. Not so much board gaming, but I'm moving into doing some more board gaming. And through that, I've had a very diverse set of gaming friends that, in where we cross paths is that sometimes some people, like a lot of my boffer friends in Kansas City, they got into War Machine recently. And so we're starting to plan, like going to Kansas City and like not fighting, just going to play games and things like that.
Absolutely.
So it's really neat how there's a lot of crossover between all of your nerd hobbies, and even people you didn't realize played board games or played miniatures gaming. That you see them mention something on Facebook, and then you can connect that way.
So, I mean, I think you hit on an interesting point, Jeff, is that if you're trying to set up a welcoming type of an environment at your LGS, is, this is a very strong hobby. That's great. That's why I'm a podcasting fucking professional right there. Let me tell you what, folks. Painting with MenothJohn right here is having your models painted and really acknowledging that part of it, because they do look more beautiful when they are painted. Even if you're not the most talented painter, they still are more engaging, let's say. By the way, Jeff, you are invited to Casa John for a weekend. Bring dye. I've got places for you to sleep. Come on up. We will paint all weekend and play games and get drunk. It'll be amazing.
That
But
sounds awesome.
You come up and we will get your gators 100% painted in one weekend. This I promise. I did a whole 50-point list in 4 hours. I can do this.
I don't know if you know how many gators I have. I have like every gator known to man.
You know what gators love more than anything in the universe?
Airbrush?
An airbrush. And, we can get that shit done. Ask Dan Skybel from Chicago. We did a whole 50-point army in, we did 2 lists actually for Adepticon in like 6 hours. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was friggin' intense. It will not be so intense for us because we'll be drinking the whole time. But
Yeah.
you and Di are always welcome up here at Casa John.
Yeah.
So other than that invite, so one of like I said, in from my standpoint, I have 2 kids, and you talk about welcoming sort of environments. I did it wrong once, and I did it right once, and I did it wrong with my older boy, and I tried to cram too much knowledge in all at once, whereas with my younger boy, I presented a more gradual introduction into miniatures, and as a result, I had much better welcoming. And I think that goes, I don't care if you're 6 or 10 or what your age is, if you're trying to create an environment that says, boy, I wish I would do that again, it's stepping that learning curve without it being so steep. And that's where I think some of these alternative formats like Mangled Metal or Highlander or Guild Ball with the small team or something like that are always really excellent vehicles to bring in new people. DC?
Well, I definitely think that's true. I also think that the lines between genres are growing ever grayer.
Yes, they are.
We go back 40-ish years, and you can either be some beardy old guy playing Pikes and Partisans, or you can be a family playing Monopoly, or you can be some old ladies playing bridge.
Yep.
Like you had this great, or you could be some role-playing games. Yeah, just barely, with saying 40 years, I think, just barely get under the radar. And you got these like weird high school outcast kids playing a role-playing game. Like, it's all so different and so distinct from one another. These weren't groups that mixed. These weren't activities that fit together or had a common meeting place, or even that had common people playing them. But now, it's so gray. Like, you take something like Shadows of Brimstone. Is that a board game? A role-playing game?
Yep.
A light miniatures game? All of the above? Take something like Undercity, where it's got some miniatures game component elements to it. You even have hobby tutorials and stuff online for painting them.
Yep.
How to paint them the best way to make it work on that gaming plastic and how it'll look the best. So it's got minis elements, it's got board game elements, it's got RPG elements. You've got card games that kind of cross some of those lines and have extra that really get integrated, card sub games being integrated more into some of these miniatures games and role-playing games. Like, all of it's coming together, and the themes are all coming together.
Yep.
Like, if I told you, okay, this particular game is about World War II, you wouldn't know what type of game it is anymore. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it's automatically got to be a miniatures game. It could be anything. It could be a role-playing game. It could be a card game. It could be a board game. It could be some amalgamation of multiple genres squished together. So I think that it has become much easier to cross those lines in the game store. I don't think we have the same great divide as we had just a couple short decades ago. People have, like Jeff said, their common interests that cross gaming lines. Like, you could play Star Wars in any gaming genre. You could play superheroes in any gaming genre. You could play military stuff in any gaming genre. So I think being able to connect someone to what they enjoy is good. But also, like you brought up, it's good to have these types of experiences that are focused on the new players, on having new people be able to get into the game fairly easily. You mentioned Arcadia Quest and Crossmaster Arena. I think those are two very strong ones.
Yep.
But there's a lot of other games kind of in that area. Oh, and you said Rivet Wars as well.
I was actually going to bring up as a topic, David, that, you know, what are your favorite of these hybrid games to bring in a new player, and why, and what is their next logical step after that game?
So I know it's a little bit of a cop-out, but it depends a lot on the player.
Okay.
Just like we were talking earlier about not sending a new player to the wrong person at the game store to learn the game from, but kind of trying to gauge, do they want to learn from a competitive guy who's going to tell them about the meta, or do they want to learn from a casual guy who's going to whip up some crazy story of this pig general? I'll send him to you, Jeff.
Yeah.
But it's the same with this as well. I think that traditionally, not a lot of people have made miniatures games that were focused on new miniatures gamers. People became miniatures gamers because it was something they saw and were drawn into and were like, I want to do that. I want to get into that. And it's only been very recently, I think, that miniatures games have become a lot more accessible. I think depending on what your desired endpoint is as this person considering miniatures games, it kind of dictates which direction to go. I think if this prospective player is looking more towards the raw gameplay of it and not the hobby side, I think the games that Jeff mentioned earlier, Star Wars, Imperial Assault, and then Star Wars X-Wing, possibly Armada. That one might not be a good gateway, though, honestly.
No.
But probably X-Wing or Imperial Assault are a good place to start that guy. But if somebody wants to learn the hobby side of it, then there are fewer choices. You can go. I guess Rivet Wars might be the best choice right now. Maybe.
I think so, only just because Rivet Wars models are very accessible. They're pre-assembled, and they're models that have a lot of open area to them, so that when you're painting them, they are relatively easy to paint. So and to get a really good result from a skill set that may not be as fully developed as it may require in other games. That's another way of saying if you suck at painting. Jeff is laughing, so I had to comment on that.
Most of us start out with a painting concept like a coloring book, right? Like, here's the different parts, and I'll color the different parts in different paints.
Yep.
And for some of the models of the games we were talking about earlier, that's a train wreck for a brand new painter.
Yeah.
Trying to do just like color in the lines for a detailed Troll Blood miniature or the brewer guy with all those barrels on him, stave or something, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yep.
There's just so much detail, and then you want to paint a tartan, and it's like, whoa. But yeah, you take a Rivet Wars guy who's got, okay, here's his face, here's his hat, here's his coat.
Yep.
It's a lot more something that people can get into a lot more easily.
Yep. And
I do also want to mention there's a Kickstarter on right now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's even going to fund. There's only a few days left, and they haven't hit their funding goal yet. But it's called Picnic Panic. And the whole kind of thrust of this game is actually what we're talking about, is non-miniatures gamers can play this miniatures game. One of the guys behind it was one of the founders of Ralpartha.
Oh.
And the game includes a whole bunch of metal miniatures that are ants in this Picnic Panic game. And the rules are streamlined. I think it's like 5 actual pages of rules, which even board games, some of the board games I've been playing lately, it's like 12, 18, 24 pages. It's a lot of meat there. This is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. And I kind of hope they do fund, because even if it's not the best miniatures game in the world, it's still nice to have that direction, to have that, hey, we're here with a goal of saying, here's something that people who don't know how to play miniatures games can pick up and play fairly easily.
And it brings up a good point, DC, in that right now I think one of the hurdles I'm facing with Belinda Librarian, my significant other, is that she loves games. She does not like combat oriented games. So it's a matter of finding a game. Now, Picnic Panic, I think she could get behind, where you've got it's a miniatures game with it. I cannot imagine a Picnic Panic game that is highly combative.
It kind of is.
Shit. Because if it means killing all the insects, she's going to have a problem.
It does. They kill each other.
Crap. Oh, well.
But they do also try to capture the candy from the middle of the table.
Okay.
And if you're playing with kids, whenever you get a victory point from the candy getting back to your base, you're supposed to have a piece of candy.
Nice.
And if you're playing with adults, you're supposed to take a shot.
Hook them up, Jeff. The chat room was asking for a link. We're going to do our part, God damn it. 12 people look like they're going to fund this project today.
Yeah.
I could see it happen. I mean, with the power of the Painting with MenothJohn network behind it,
we're a fucking force.
I could see it happen.
Yeah, as president for life of War Machine Hordes, I know that I can make this happen.
Yeah, the at game.
I will issue all the errata for Picnic Panic.
Speaking of Painting with MenothJohn, I have some advice for the Painting with MenothJohn.
We're all ears.
For how to suck at painting.
Yeah.
So I have this is gel glue.
That's not
I have
paint.
a bunch of it.
That's not
also
paint.
known as gap filler.
That's not paint.
Yeah, but
just gonna put that out there.
If you suck at hobby miniatures, you just get gel glue and you just shove it in the hole, and you can just stick it on there, and it'll make this little gel horrible bond. But for me, it's great because I'm like, whatever. I'll just stick this in the gap, and then you paint over it. It's fine.
I'm going to beg you and die to come to my house.
So I think this is worth discussing when we're talking about being welcoming and talking about hobby miniatures games, is that it goes beyond the gameplay. We talked a little bit about people who talk a lot about the meta. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's not so good for new players. We talked a little bit about errata, people focusing on that a bunch at the game store. You want to gauge whether that's the right conversation with a new player or not. Keeping that positive attitude that is always the trademark of the Painting with MenothJohn show. But then also the hobby side. I've seen new players be like, "Oh, look at this thing I did," and some veteran painter be like, "Oh, whoa,
Yeah,
that was terrible.
For
Don't
God's
even
sakes,
show that to me.
If you're that
Don't
guy,
do that.
If you're that guy, go burn in a fire. Because honest to sweet Lord baby Jesus, anyone who has ever picked up a miniature, by God, for the first few that they did, unless there's some kind of goddamn prodigy, their stuff looked like something that just fell out of goddamn Hobby Lobby. I swear to God, do not be that person. If you see a miniature, I don't care what it does to your stomach.
I'm still that guy.
Offer some suggestions that aren't
4 years later. I'm still
offer suggestions that don't involve that person driving an ice pick through their brain.
Right.
Tell them that thinning your paints is a good thing. Start with something similar to that. Tell them to go buy miniatures paints, because miniatures paints, while costing a little bit more, last for goddamn ever. And they are amazing to paint with. Buy a paintbrush that costs more than 30 cents. All of these things are totally legit. And just say, hey, listen, if you do this, this, and this, and then let's meet back at the hobby shop. Let's sit down, and I will help you. I will teach you how to base coat, dry brush, and wash. And in three easy lessons. And in 3 easy lessons, I will teach you how to go from 0 to not sucking in just that fast. And then when you master that, then we'll talk about blending and highlighting.
Yeah, I really think that a big plug for Painting with MenothJohn. It's a very good learn how to paint episode.
Because I'm always learning.
Start at 1 and then go to 95 or whatever he's at now.
Yeah, because I'm not a great painter. I'm just a guy that drinks rum and it wants to teach.
And I think this kind of brings us back around to where we started, which is good because we should probably wrap up fairly soon here.
I suppose.
But brings us back around to that getting to know the person a little bit.
Yeah.
Do they want to be a good painter? Or do they just want to paint well enough to get some models on the table in a reasonable amount of time?
You bet.
Do they want to be a tournament player? Or do they just want to have some fun and paint cool models? Do they want to play crazy, fun league stuff with Jeff telling wacky stories? Or do they want to get down to painting and playing? Like, get to know them, see what they're into, and be what they need you to be to welcome them, to be a warm personality for them.
This is called situational leadership. Do not be a dick, and just simply find out what this person wants out of their experience and help them attain that. It is what you should be doing in your life, not just at the game store. It's about reaching out to people around you and helping them be awesome. And I promise you, I'm freaking old. I know these things, okay? I'm old. Listen to your grandfather, okay? If you simply do nothing more than try to make those around you awesome, then you will have won life. And the more that you do that, the happier people will be around you and the more fun you will have. And I promise, and if you're the kind of manager that walks in and beats your people to death, turns out you're going to have a bad time. You may succeed short term, you will lose long term. I promise you this. But if you make everybody awesome around you, then everybody's awesome. And it's super cool. And so do that. And that's, I think, what our overarching message is here, is that go into that game store and make everybody awesome. And then you will have won and you'll have cool people to play with. And at the end of the day, all of us miniatures players, all we want is a bunch of cool people to play with.
That's right. The more you know.
I know, right? I feel like I just did a PSA for like not being a dick.
Yeah, well,
That's a good one.
we'll cut that. We'll cut that out, and then we'll send that out to everybody.
Southern Tier beer. I'll tell you what, it's the number one thing to help you have a good attitude about life.
It's awesome.
Anyway, so guys, do you have any closing thoughts, DC?
I think we covered a lot of good stuff. We talked about being individually welcoming to your miniatures game table. We talked about game companies making their games more welcoming and what they can do there.
Yep.
We talked about kind of these bridge games that can welcome people from other types of gaming into miniatures gaming and to the hobby. So yeah, I think we talked about a lot of what I wanted to, and I hope that you guys are now thinking a bit about how we can say in that Bob Ross dulcet toned voice, I'd like to welcome you to our miniatures gaming table.
Jeff, what do you got for us?
There's a lot of veteran gamers, a lot of new gamers. My advice, just find your love. Like if you've been playing for 5 or 10 years, go back to battle box games, go back to those original models that made you love the game. And whenever you're grinding it out in tournaments and grinding out in all these lists, just go back and find what makes it special. And that rekindles that fire you have for the game and that passion. I think that's just the advice I have, because I've been going back to, I have my table upstairs. I've been putting some Signar on there, some Peace Striker, like my original first models I ever had.
Yeah, getting that old school vibe.
That's a lot of fun to just kind of hang out with them. It's like rekindling friendships with old friends.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And folks, if you've enjoyed what you've heard here today on The Joy of Playing, I highly encourage you to listen to more of it, because when you look at Your Turn Next and Your Turn Go, and hopefully the Painting with MenothJohn show available on this very channel that you're watching right now on the Sunday nights at 7 p.m., these are welcoming things, and we're going to talk about fun stuff that's going to hopefully help you think about the games a little bit differently. On behalf of David Carl and Jeff Easterwood and myself, MenothJohn, we're going to call it a show, and we will see you next time for episode 3 of The Joy of Playing in probably like a month or something like that. So,
all right.
Sounds good.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good one.